Mormonism with the Murph, where Larry Singh explores church history and the church's truth claims. Hello everyone. So in the last episode we had a look at, is there any archaeological evidence to support the Book of Mormon, its historicity and authenticity? So critics and non-LDS archaeologists would say that there is no definitive archaeological evidence to support the Book of Mormon's historicity. Faithful scholars and apologists would say that there are growing convergences between the text of the Book of Mormon and, for example, Old World geography, Lehi's travel through the Arabian desert, Nahum and Bountiful correlating together in time and location, and that there is also growing convergences and correlations between the Book of Mormon and Mesoamerica. We discussed some of the discoveries of LiDAR technology, comparing Mayan warfare to the Book of Mormon and the destruction in 3rd Nephi, as well as many others. So go back and watch that episode if you haven't. In today's episode, we're going to be exploring the witnesses of the Book of Mormon. I did say at the end of the last video that we're going to look at the complexity of the Book of Mormon. However, the episode I was going to do about Book of Mormon complexity and also Book of Mormon authorship theories sort of go together, and I want to do this episode beforehand. So this episode will be very much looking at their eyewitness testimonies, both of the coming forth, the translation and dictation of the Book of Mormon, as well as the witnesses of the gold plates. I already did a series on the witnesses of the gold plate, so I won't be getting into every single criticism leveled against the witnesses. Go check out the series and the previous episodes that I've done, but I will be sort of re-going over that and also sharing some more quotes and some more arguments that maybe I didn't fully represent beforehand. And I would have to recommend the book by Richard Lloyd Anderson, the lead expert on the witnesses, investigating Mormon witnesses. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at some of the statements of both the eyewitnesses of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, the translation, and of the 3 innate witnesses of the gold plates, as well as other unofficial witnesses who claimed either to hold the plates wrapped in a cloth, or who claim to have some visionary experience. And what we'll be looking at is, do the testimony of the witnesses of the gold plates and the translation of the Book of Mormon, do they support the Book of Mormon's authenticity? Certainly eyewitness testimony would be considered evidence in a court of law. I'm going to try to limit my own personal commentary and dialogue, as there's a lot to get through, so I'm going to try to read a lot of the quotes and limit my input. But really, whether or not the Book of Mormon is true, historical, ancient, divine, or Joseph Smith was a prophet, it can't be proven by what the witnesses of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon have to say. But it's important to understand what they believed about it and to read their statements and their testimonies accurately. So Joseph had to say of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, the one who translated it supposedly, that he translated it by the gift and power of God, and that it wasn't expedient for the world to know all the particulars of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. So the witnesses in their testimonies, they described Joseph translating either with the Nephite interpreters or spectacles, which are often referred to as the Urim and Thummim, which were 2 stones, white transparent stones in a silver rim, worn as spectacles attached to a breastplate, which were buried with the plates. And they also discuss and refer to a seer stone that Joseph would use by putting a seer stone in a hat, putting his face in the hat, and then reading or dictating as the words appeared. Emma said, "In writing for your father, I frequently wrote day after day, often sitting at the table close by him. He sitting with his face buried in his hat, with a stone in it, and dictating hour after hour with nothing between us. The plates themselves often lay on the table without any attempt at concealment, and Joseph had neither manuscript nor book to read from. Emma further remarked that if Joseph had anything of the kind, he could not have concealed it from me." Michael Morse's testimony is similar, who was a brother-in-law to Emma. He witnessed Joseph doing the translation and described what he saw, that the mode of procedure consisted in Joseph's placing the seer stone in the crown of a hat, and putting his face into the hat so as to entirely cover his face, resting his elbows upon his knees, and then dictating word after word, while the scribe, Emma, John Whitmer, Oliver Cowdery, or some other wrote it down. Elizabeth Cowdery, who was Oliver's sister, had to say this: "I often sat by, saw and heard them translate and write for hours together." This was Joseph and Oliver. Joseph never had a curtain drawn between him and his scribe while he was translating. He would place the director in his hat, and then place his face in his hat so as to exclude the light, and then read the words as they appeared before him. Joseph Knight Sr. said, "Now the way he translated was he put the Urim and Thummim into his hat, darkened his eyes so that he could see the words a sentence at a time." David Whitmer described the translation as Joseph putting a seer stone in his hat, putting his face in the hat, and then reading the words as the spiritual light would shine. Harris also speaks of Joseph using a seer stone, and there's an account of him swapping Joseph's seer stone during the translation with another similar stone to test that Joseph really wasn't just memorizing sentences and then reciting them. These accounts are also supported by Jonathan Hadley, who was a non-believer. So after the dictation of the Book of Mormon was completed, Joseph Smith took the manuscript of the Book of Mormon to get it printed, and he went to the printing press of E.B. Grandin and Jonathan Hadley. Jonathan Hadley had to say of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, which is a non-Mormon and a contemporary account. He said that it was said that the leaves of the Book of Mormon were plates of gold, about 8 inches long, 6 wide, and 1/8 of an inch thick, on which were engraved characters or hieroglyphics. By placing the spectacles in a hat and looking into it, Smith could, he said so at least, interpret these characters. So we've many witnesses here, such as Emma, Elizabeth Cowdery, Michael Morse, Martin Harris, David Whitmer, Joseph Knight Sr., as well as this non-Mormon contemporary account, talking about the method of translation being either Joseph putting a seer stone or the Urim and Thummim, the spectacles, into a hat and dictating the words as he looked into the hat. Now, Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery, as they recount the Book of Mormon translation, tend to just refer to the Urim and Thummim. And I probably will be doing an interview with Jonathan Neville and James Lucas on their book by way of the Urim and Thummim, and we'll probably talk more about that. But for this video, I don't want to get too much into that. From my view, there are many sources supporting that a seer stone was used, and it was the method of translation was putting the stone or the spectacles into a hat. It's not always crystal clear whether or not Joseph Smith was using the Urim and Thummim or was using the seer stone. There's a couple of statements from both Emma Smith, Martin Harris, David Whitmer, indicating that Joseph began using the spectacles or Urim and Thummim during the 116 pages, but then used the seer stone, which Martin said he did for convenience. However, it's not always crystal clear, because when Martin swaps the stone, that would have been when he was the principal scribe during the 116 pages. And although many of their statements support a tight word for word and inerrant translation that a character would appear, followed by the translation, and that they couldn't move on until it was written down correctly, I've discussed in a previous episode, the one I did on changes to the Book of Mormon, and also my discussion with Brent Gardner, that the original manuscript is clear that there are errors and mistakes, both in spelling and grammatical. And the process of transmission is definitely not inerrant. And I think most likely that the witnesses believe that was the process that was happening, because there is evidence of when they came to names that Joseph would spell out the names. And for example, the name Coriantumr was written phonetically by Oliver Cowdery, but then changed to the correct spelling. So it's quite clear from the original manuscript that it was tight control when it came to names, but not the rest of the text. So my view is that the witnesses wrote what they perceived was happening, and they probably tried to make it even more miraculous. Joseph himself just said it was by the gift and power of God, and that it wasn't expedient for the world to know all the particulars of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. So the original manuscript does debunk this view of an inerrant translation, although some would still hold to that maybe it was a tight translation, that it was appearing word for word on the stone, whether it was coming supernaturally, while others would lean towards Joseph Smith being the translator, that he was the one receiving by inspiration the meaning of the plates and was having to clothe it in his language, whether or not he was seeing the words on the stone or in his mind. We'll talk more about the translation theories in a future episode. And the witnesses, they described the Book of Mormon translation and dictation as miraculous, and that there is no notes, no manuscript, or no book that he was reading from. And although it sounds pretty goofy, him with a stone in a hat seems kind of weird, it also shows there's no way that he could have been reading from anything. David Whitmer with Emma stated in an interview, while Smith was dictating the translation, he had no manuscripts, notes, or other means of knowledge save the seer stone, and the characters as shown on the plates. He, Whitmer, being present and cognizant of how it was done. Emma said he had neither manuscript nor book to read from. If he had anything of the kind, he could not have concealed it from me. That my belief is that the Book of Mormon is of divine authenticity. I have not the slightest doubt of it. I am satisfied that no man could have dictated the writing of the manuscript unless he was inspired. For when acting as a scribe, your father would dictate to me hour after hour, and when returning after meals or after interruptions, he would at once begin where he had left off, without either seeing the manuscript or having any portion read to him. This was a usual thing for him to do. It would have been impossible that a learned man could do this, and for one so ignorant and unlearned as he was, it was simply impossible. She then also said that Joseph as a young man could neither write nor dictate a coherent and well-worded letter, let alone dictate a book like the Book of Mormon. Now, critics might think that these witnesses are just trying to downplay Joseph's intelligence, make him dumber and less learned than what he was, and also maybe trying to make the translation more miraculous. However, it's important to also listen to those people who knew Joseph best at the time. For example, his mother said that he wasn't as interested in the reading of books as her other children. Like Emma, Harris said that he sat at the table near Joseph and wrote down the words as Joseph dictated. He likewise mentioned the plates lying on the table, wrapped in or covered with a small tablecloth. He left at least 25 statements about his involvement, declaring that he was favored to write directly from the mouth of the prophet Joseph Smith. Knowing that Joseph could not translate the ancient characters on the plates, he marveled at the complexity of the text and how fluidly Joseph dictated the Book of Mormon to him. Oliver Cowdery, as the principal scribe for the Book of Mormon, had to say this. He said, "These were days never to be forgotten, to sit under the sound of a voice dictated by the inspiration of heaven." Oliver ended up being a second witness, the law of witnesses, when the priesthood was restored at this time as well. John the Baptist, the Aaronic priesthood, then Peter, James, and John a month later in June of 1829, restoring the Melchizedek priesthood. Oliver fell away for a period of time, but came back towards the end of his life. But while he was out of the church, he never denied any of these miraculous experiences. Daniel Peterson summarizes the testimony of the witnesses of the translation of the Book of Mormon. He says, in addition, the evidence indicates that the translation and dictation of the book were accomplished in roughly 63 working days. A torrid pace with neither rewrites nor corrections produced nearly 8.5 pages daily. Further, there is no evidence at all that Joseph did any scholarly research, or even that he read very much before the Book of Mormon appeared. In fact, he may not have even owned a Bible at the time of translation. His mother later recalled, even into his late teens, he seemed much less inclined to the perusal of books than any of the rest of our children. His wife Emma reported that in the late 1820s, Joseph could neither write nor dictate a coherent and well-worded letter, let alone a book like the Book of Mormon, and that the larger part of this labor of translation was done in her presence, where she could see and know what was being done. And during no part of it did Joseph Smith have any manuscripts or any book of any kind from which to read or dictate, except the metallic plates, which I knew he had. If she said he had anything of the kind, he could not have concealed it from me. So to summarize the testimony of the witnesses, they're quite consistent that he used either the Urim and Thummim or the Nephite interpreters, the spectacles, or the seer stone, which he put in the hat and put his face in the hat, and then dictated, as they believe, as the words appeared on the stone, that he had no notes, manuscript, or book to read from. And they believe that he dictated as being inspired and spiritually guided, and viewed the translation coming forth of the Book of Mormon as miraculous. Now, you could just say that they're religious believers and they were very gullible, but that's what their testimonies are of what happened. Okay, so let's talk a little about the testimony of the three witnesses of the gold plates, which is Martin Harris, David Whitmer, and Oliver Cowdery. So in their official testimony, they testify of seeing the plates and an angel and hearing the voice of God declaring the work to be true and the translation, and that they are to testify of the things which they have seen. So did these witnesses reaffirm and stay true to their testimonies of seeing the angel and the gold plates? Okay, so let's start with Oliver, who's probably the most important witness. He's not only the witness of the Book of Mormon and of the gold plates, the main principal scribe, but also claimed to be a witness of the priesthood restoration, the sealing keys being restored in the Kirtland Temple. So he's a really important witness. So he says, I wrote with my own pen the entire Book of Mormon, save a few pages, as it fell from the lips of the prophet Joseph, as he translated by the gift and power of God by means of the Urim and Thummim, or as it is called by the book, holy interpreters. I beheld with my eyes and handled with my hands the gold plates from which it was transcribed. That book is true. Oliver was once asked, was your testimony based on a dream? Was it the imagination of your mind? Was it an illusion? He responded with the exact same qualifying statements as the other two witnesses. My eyes saw, my ears heard, my understanding was touched, and I know that whereof I testified is true. It was no dream, no vain imagination of the mind, it was real. Another first-hand statement, so it's very credible, and it's within 6 months of their visionary experience. It's a written response to the question about whether juggling or trickery or conjuring could have been involved. Quote, it was a clear, open, beautiful day, far from any inhabitants in a remote field at the time we saw the record of which it has been spoken, brought and laid before us by an angel, arrayed in glorious light, who ascended, descended, I suppose, out of the midst of heaven. Now if this is human juggling, judge ye. Oliver never denied his visionary experience, even after falling out with Joseph Smith and him being excommunicated from the church, and was out of the church for about 10 years before returning back and being rebaptized. Oliver's testimony seems to be very sure that he believes and knows that he saw the angel and the gold plates, and it was no hallucination, dream, trick, or conjuring to him. Martin Harris, who's probably viewed as the least credible witness, being a bit of a superstitious or religious nut, and we'll get into some of his quotes later about spiritual eyes. But after being out of the church for a time, he says, "I was the right-hand man of Joseph Smith, and I know that he was a prophet of God. I know the Book of Mormon is true." Then smiting his fist on the table, he said, "And you know that I know it is true. I know that plates have been translated by the gift and power of God, for his voice declared it unto us. Therefore, I know of a surety that the work is true." There are other occasions where Martin Harris reaffirms that he knows that he saw the angel in the plates. From Martin Harris to William Glenn, he recorded Martin saying, "Gentlemen, do you see that hand? Are you sure you see it? Are your eyes playing a trick or something? No. Well, as sure as you see my hand, so sure did I see the angel in the plates." Harris told Robert Avison, "It is not a mere belief, but it is a matter of knowledge. I saw the plates and the inscriptions thereon. I saw the angel, and he showed them unto me." On another occasion, to Robert, he said, "As plain as you see the chopping block, I saw the plates. And sooner than I would deny it, I would lay my head upon that chopping block and let you chop it off." On his deathbed, responding to George Godfrey's suggestion that he may have been deceived, he says, "The Book of Mormon is no fake. I know what I know, I have seen what I've seen, and I have heard what I've heard. I have seen the gold plates from which the Book of Mormon is written. An angel appeared to me and others and testified to the truthfulness of the record. Had I been willing to perjure myself and sworn falsely the testimony I now bear, I could have been a rich man, but I could not have testified other than I have done, and am now doing, for these things are true." So according to these statements, Martin Harris is as sure as you see the sun in the sky, as sure as you see that chopping block, he knows that he saw the angel at the plates, saying that he could have been a rich man had he have denied those things, had he have exposed the fraud, but never did. And Martin Harris, even going to different churches and religious groups, still maintained his testimony of the Book of Mormon and returned back. Now, David Whitmer was probably the most interviewed witness. He was the one that lived the longest, and he never returned back to the church, believing Joseph Smith to be a fallen prophet, but yet he never denied his testimony and reaffirmed it to the day he died. When David Whitmer was interviewed by Poulsen about his vision, he said, "We saw it, and our testimony which we give to the world is true exactly as you read it. We saw by the gift and power of God, as we were praying, the angel stood before us in his glory, and all those things were before us, as they were laid before us on a table. We heard the testimony about the plates, and we were commanded to bear that testimony to the world, and our testimony is true." Joseph III recorded Colonel Giles, who asked him if it might not have been possible that he, Mr. Whitmer, had been mistaken and had simply been moved upon by some mental disturbance or hallucination, which had deceived them into thinking he saw the personage, the angel, the plates, the Urim and Thummim, and the sword of Laban. How well and distinctly I remember the manner in which Elder Whitmer rose and drew himself up to his full height, little over 6 feet, and said, in solemn and impressive tones, "No, sir, I was not under any hallucination, nor was I deceived. I saw with these eyes and heard with these ears. I know whereof I speak." On another occasion, David Whitmer said, "Those who know me best well know that I have always adhered to that testimony, and that no man may be misled or doubt my present views in regards to the same. I do again affirm the truth of all my statements." David Whitmer never denied his testimony, even when asked by friends and even his grandson to expose the fraud. He reaffirmed with honesty and sincerity of the reality of the vision he saw. Missouri newspaperman Joe Johnson wrote, after an interview with David Whitmer, "Skeptics may laugh and scoff if they will, but no man can listen to Mr. Whitmer as he talks of his interview with the angel of the Lord without being most forcibly convinced that he has heard an honest man tell what he honestly believes to be true." And a final testimony of David Whitmer: "I will say once more to all mankind that I have never at any time denied that testimony or any part thereof. I also testify to the world that neither Oliver Cowdery or Martin Harris ever at any time denied their testimony. They both died affirming the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon." So none of the three witnesses ever denied their testimony, even after all three of them leaving the church and feeling disenchanted with Joseph Smith, but they reaffirmed and bore their testimony continuously until the day they died. Martin and Oliver returned to the church, but David never did, but he still reaffirmed his testimony until his deathbed and even had it engraved on his gravestone. Reading these statements, it's very clear that these three men believed that they really did see the angel and the plates and heard the voice of God. Whether or not it was a hallucination or they were somehow tricked by Joseph Smith in some sort of hypnosis, it is clear from their statements that to them, They are sure that they saw what they saw. They don't believe it was a hallucination, trickery, or a mental disturbance. It was real to them. And it's really up to us whether or not we believe their testimonies or not. And we'll maybe get to some of the troubling quotes on the 3 witnesses later in the video. So what about the 8 witnesses who didn't claim to have a visionary experience of seeing the angel in the plates, but that they held and saw the plates and the engravings thereon in more of a natural way? Hiram Page in 1847, after leaving the church for some time, said, "As to the Book of Mormon, it would be doing injustice to myself and to the work of God of the last days to say that I can know a thing to be true in 1830 and know the same thing to be false in 1847. His son quoted him later as saying, "I knew my father to be true and faithful to his testimony of the divinity of the Book of Mormon until the very last. Whenever he had an opportunity to bear his testimony to this effect, he would always do so and seemed to rejoice exceedingly in having been privileged to see the plates." Daniel Tyler, who was a convert to Mormonism, said of Samuel Smith's testimony, brother of the prophet, "In the spring of 1832, Samuel H. Smith and Orson Hyde came to our neighborhood and delineated the circumstances of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, of which he said he was a witness. He knew his brother Joseph had the plates, for the prophet had shown them to him, and he had handled them and seen the engravings thereon." Hiram gave testimony both of seeing and handling the plates. He said he had but 2 hands and 2 eyes. He said he had seen the plates with his eyes and handled them with his hands. In 1841, Joseph Fielding said that his sister, Hiram's wife, Mary Fielding, assured him that her husband has seen and handled the plates. And Hiram also sealed his testimony with his blood when he was in Carthage jail with his brother Joseph. Hiram reads portions of the Book of Mormon the night before the martyrdom, and the next day bore testimony of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. "Having given my testimony to the world of the truth of the Book of Mormon, however, I thank God that I felt a determination to die, rather than deny the things which my eyes had seen, which my hands had handled, and which I had borne testimony to, wherever my lot had been cast. I can assure my beloved brethren that I was enabled to bear strong testimony when nothing but death presented itself as ever I did in my life." Hiram's resolve to die rather than deny what he knew was true was put directly to the test in 1844, when he and Joseph suffered martyrdom at Carthage jail. Significantly, this occurred shortly after they read and testified of the Book of Mormon one final time. Thus, while other members of the 3 and 8 witnesses suffered persecution for the sake of the Book of Mormon, Hiram is the only one who, as it were, sealed his testimony with his own life and blood. John Whitmer, who lived the longest of the 8 witnesses, stated that he signed his name to the testimony of the Book of Mormon as a revelation from God, and that he had seen and handled the plates and knew Joseph translated by the gift and power of God. So these testimony of the 8 witnesses seem to support and reaffirm their testimony that they saw and handled the plates. Okay, so let's address some of the criticisms raised against the witnesses. We'll start with the 3 witnesses and then the 8 witnesses. So the CS letter quotes some second or third hand statements with regards to the 3 witnesses. So a quote from Martin Harris, that "I never saw the golden plates, but only in a visionary or entranced state. I saw them with the eye of faith, and I saw the plates as I saw a city through a mountain." He then asked if these witnesses literally really saw the plates like everyone else on the planet sees tangible objects. Why strange statements? "I never saw them, only as I see a city through a mountain." What does that even mean? I've never seen a city through a mountain, have you? Why all these bizarre statements from the witnesses if the plates were real and the event literal? And I would have to agree with him. Whenever I first looked at these quotes, I did find them quite troubling, and I had only read the official testimony of the 3 and the 8 witnesses at the front of the Book of Mormon. So whenever I looked at these, I thought, hold on, did they really actually see the angel in the plates? First of all, the CS letter, and most critics tend to focus on a small minority of critical quotes about the witnesses, which typically tend to be second or third hand. Doesn't mean that you should throw them out, but it means that you need to take into account the 95% which are positive. Many of those statements which I showed prior, where the witnesses very clearly and emphatically testify that they know they saw the angel and they saw the plates. Jim Bennett, in the CS letter responds to 2 of the quotes from the early Mormon documents. He says that these 2 statements are part of a single quote attributed to Martin Harris after his death by Anthony Metcalfe. No credible historian in or out of the church accepts these hearsay slanders as reliable. And also that describing a visit from an angel as a vision does not preclude that it was a literal experience. Farr addresses and responds to Clark's statements that this is a third-hand statement not coming from Clark's interactions with Harris first-hand, but from a gentleman in Palmyra. There could be a conflation of Harris seeing the plates as you see a city through a mountain, while the plates were covered when Martin was scribe and the plates were covered in the cloth. Because when we look at the other statements from Martin Harris, he's very clear when he talks about seeing the angel. As sure as you see my hand, I saw the angel in the plates. Perhaps this is being quoted when he was scribe. And also, if something's third hand, it means it's a little bit less reliable than it's coming first hand. They also say when Martin Harris said that he had seen the angel in the plates with his spiritual eyes or with an eye of faith, he may have simply been employing some scriptural language that he was familiar with. Such statements do not mean that the angel in the plates were imaginary, hallucinatory, or just an inner mental image. The earliest accounts of Martin Harris's testimony makes the literal nature of the experience unmistakable. And spiritual eyes is also a scriptural term. For example, Moses talked about seeing God with his spiritual eyes, but not his natural eyes. And elsewhere, Martin has emphasized seeing with natural eyes. And in D&C, I believe it's 17, it talks about the witnesses seeing with the eye of faith. Stephen Burnett quoted Martin Harris that he, Oliver, or David never saw the plates, but only in vision or hallucination, and that neither did the 8, and hesitated to sign that instrument, and that Martin only hefted them in a box, and saw the plates as he sees a city through a mountain, and only hefted them under a cloth, and saw them as he sees a city through a mountain, calling into question, did the 3 and 8 witnesses really see the plates? Richard Lord Anderson responds, Burnett uses only 4 times to ridicule the experience, showing his disbelief, not Martin's speech. So Burnett paraphrased Martin with the evident rationalizations of a skeptic. Study of Martin's interviews show how strongly he insisted that the sight of the angel and the plates was as real as the sight of the physical objects around him. In an 1870 letter, Martin Harris says, I do say that the angel did show to me the plates containing the Book of Mormon. The witnesses left us no evidence that they doubted the reality of what they experienced supernaturally as well as physically and tangibly. Terrell Givens compared it to Paul's vision. Whether in the body or out of the body, I can't tell. But using the term spiritual eyes doesn't undermine the reality of what he saw. Martin emphatically asserts until the day of his death the actuality of the angel who came down from heaven and who brought and laid the plates before our eyes that we beheld and saw, but also at times stating that he saw in a spiritual vision. So we're relying on if Martin Harris was accurately recorded by Stephen Burnett. And it's also understanding that quote with other statements from Martin Harris where he makes it very emphatic and clear that he saw the angel and he saw the plates. But it might call into question, was this a natural, like physical experience, or was this just a spiritual vision? Did they just imagine it, or was it second sight? David Whitmer has to say this. He rejected that either it was spiritual or natural by saying that he saw by both spiritual and natural means. The superb interview of David Whitmer's own words on this point, he explained that he saw the plates with his natural eyes, but he had to be prepared for it, that he and the other witnesses were overshadowed by the power of God and a halo of brightness indescribable. A letter written to Anthony Metcalfe in 1887, David Whitmer has this to say about spiritual eyes and seeing in vision. In regards to my testimony to the visitation of the angel who declared to us, their witness, that the Book of Mormon is true, I have this to say, of course we are in the spirit when we have the view, for no man can behold the face of an angel except in a spiritual view. But we are in the body also, and everything was as natural to us as it is at any time. Martin Harris, you say, called it being in vision. We read in the scriptures, Cornelius saw in a vision an angel of God. Daniel saw an angel in a vision. So according to Whitmer, that they were in the spirit, that it was a visionary experience, but they were in the body also, and that everything was as natural around them. And that using the word vision doesn't mean it wasn't real. So when people say that the witnesses never actually saw the plates, it was just spiritual eyes or vision, which means they just imagined it, I feel like they're not taking into account many of the statements of the witnesses that are faith promoting. Particularly if you're looking to be transparent, you should read all of the testimonies, not just the ones that try to portray the witnesses and their testimonies in a bad light, even if they're second, especially if they're second or third hand. So whether or not Burnett is accurately reflecting what Harris said, maybe he interpreted some of the things that Harris said in that meeting as faith demoting. Perhaps Harris used the terms I saw in vision, or used the word spiritual eyes, and inserted his own skepticism and loss of faith in his statement. But it's clear on other occasions, Harris and the other 2 witnesses emphatically reaffirmed that they saw the angel and they saw the plates. It was real to them. Another criticism is that the 8 witnesses never saw the plates either. Along with the Burnett quote, critics often cite that John Whitmer, stating that he handled the plates and saw them, and they were shown to him by a supernatural power. Supernatural meaning a subjective seeing, not a literal, natural, and tangible viewing of the plates. Richard Lord Anderson responds that Turley writes the interview down 4 years later. and he confuses John as one of the three witnesses seeing the angel. Anderson says, will you believe the 5% or the 95%? And the supernatural power is likely a conflation, as Whitmer describes feeling a supernatural power as he held the plates, covered during the Book of Mormon translation, and felt a spiritual force, but not when the 8 witnesses were shown the plates. In an 1878 interview with the Deseret News, Whitmer stated that Joseph handed him the plates uncovered, and in the 1836 Messenger and Advocate that he saw and handled the plates. Joshua Davis heard John declare, I with my own eyes saw the plates from which the Book of Mormon was translated. Overall, there's also a letter by Myron Bond to the Saints Herald in 1878. Writes about, old Father Whitmer told me last winter with tears in his eyes that he knew as well as he knew he had in existence that Joseph translated the ancient writing which was upon the plates, which he saw and handled, and which, as one of the scribes, he helped to copy as the words fell from Joseph's lips, by supernatural or almighty power. So the conflation that Turley writes about him seeing and handling by supernatural power is probably a conflation where he talks about both seeing and handling the plates as one of the 8 witnesses, but also as one of the scribes feeling a supernatural force or almighty power as Joseph translated, clarifying that he did still see the plates naturally, and could be a likely explanation. Overall, the majority of the statements of the 3 witnesses support that they believe that they really saw the angel and the plates in a vision and heard the voice of God, and that the 8 witnesses saw and handled the plates naturally. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the gold plates are ancient or of divine origin, but it's important to represent their testimonies accurately. What about the 8 witnesses being tricked with fake metal plates, and that Joseph Smith made his own plates perhaps of tin, like Strang did with his witnesses? This is possible. I do think it's quite risky that Joseph would have them pass visible inspection. And I also just don't find the evidence of Joseph making his own metal plates super compelling to me. But it's certainly possible. And critics would also say with that, with the 3 witnesses, maybe they just had a mass hallucinatory visionary experience. Fair states that only 3% of the population are susceptible to visual hallucinations and 9% audible hallucinations. The witnesses both claim to both see the angel in the plates and to hear the voice of God. These statistics reduce the likelihood that all 3 men would hallucinate the same thing and never deny it until the day they died. And Vogel would believe that all 3 of them would have had sort of experiences that would have made them more susceptible, being believers, open, having more of a visionary mindset. Still, the odds of all 3 of them having a mass hallucination of seeing the angel and the plates, never denying it even after leaving the church. And on top of this as well, the Book of Mormon prophesies that 3 witnesses will see the plates in the Book of Ether by the power of God, as well in section 17 of the Doctrine and Covenants, which is a pretty amazing and very overconfident thing for Joseph Smith to prophesy and then pull off, and that they all happen to hallucinate the same vision and never deny it and reaffirm it until the day they die. For Joseph Smith to have pulled off a mass hallucination, whether he influenced it or it was self-induced by the 3 witnesses, as well as making his own set of metal plates to dupe the 8 witnesses, that's pretty amazing if he was able to pull that off. The supernatural power of the angel's visit to the 3 witnesses finds its physical foundation in the fact that 8 ordinary men insisted all of their lives that they had carefully examined and handled ancient plates of the Book of Mormon. So if you just had the testimony of the 3 witnesses, then I think you could argue the possibility or probability that it was just a hallucination, a mass hallucination that they had. And then if only the 8 witnesses claimed to see and handle the Book of Mormon, you could say that maybe they were tricked with fake modern metal plates. But the theory would have to be, to explain away the 3 and the 8 witnesses, is that Joseph was somehow able to induce, or they induced in themselves, mass hallucinations of the angel and the plates, both audible and visual. And he also engaged in metallurgical fraud, which there's no evidence or accounts of Joseph, going to the hill, buying tin, having the skills to make his own plates. It's funny, I actually had a family member who I talked to about Dan Vogel's theory for Joseph Smith making his own metal plates out of tin. And she actually found it very implausible. She thought there is no evidence to support, Joseph buying tin, him having the abilities to make his own tin plates. And she said that surely there would have been an account from somebody suspecting or accusing him of it. And then she concluded that there probably just never was plates. I said to her that
Not only are there the testimony of the 3 and the 8 witnesses, but you've also got many other informal, unofficial witnesses who either claim to hold the plates wrapped in a cloth or have a visionary experience. So there's way too many witnesses supporting that there was, in fact, a plate artifact. It's whether or not it was 19th century manufactured plates by Joseph Smith or ancient metal plates delivered by an angel.
But on top of the 3 and the 8 witnesses, there's also other informal witnesses who either testify to handling the plates covered in a cloth or having a visionary experience. Dan Peterson says, I assert with the testimony of the 3 and the 8 witnesses that we do not simply have an arithmetic sum of 2 collective witnesses. It's rather, given the different nature of the reported experience, the difficulty for those who want to dismiss the claims of the witnesses is increased geometrically, not merely arithmetically, by the existence of the 2 kinds of witness. So let's talk about the informal witnesses. So Lucy Mack Smith testified of feeling the Urim and Thummim or the spectacles through the cloth. Other people like Josiah Stoll, Joseph Knight Sr., William Smith, Catherine Smith, all claimed to hold and heft the plates under the cloth, all supporting that there was definitely some sort of plate artifact. Emma also stated of moving and feeling the plates and that they had a metallic sound and that they were pliable like thick paper. And while none of these witnesses claimed to actually seeing the plates, they support that there was a plate artifact, whether 19th century manufactured by Joseph Smith or ancient. Mary Whitmer also had a visionary experience of the angel in the plate while milking cows. Her own vision could not have been induced by Joseph Smith through hypnosis, and she too never denied the testimony of her experience. A couple of final powerful testimonies about the Book of Mormon. This one comes from William McLellin about David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery. There in the lonely woods, I met with David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery. I said to them, brethren, I never have seen an open vision in my life, but you men say you have, and therefore you positively know. Now you know that our lives are in danger every hour. If the mob can only catch us, tell me in the fear of God, is that Book of Mormon true? Cowdery looked at me with solemnity depicted in his face and said, Brother William, God sent his holy angel to declare the truth of the translation of it to us, and therefore we know. And though the mob kill us, yet we must die declaring its truth. David said, Oliver has told you the solemn truth. He said, boys, I believe you. I can see no object for you to tell me falsehood when our lives are endangered. John Rigdon interviewed his father, Sidney Rigdon, at the end of his life. While he was not a Book of Mormon witness, his testimony is also powerful of the divine origin and authenticity of the Book of Mormon. John Rigdon interviewed him close to his death. John ended up joining the church, and he wrote, Is it true? If so, all right. If it is not, you owe it to me and to your family to tell it. You're an old man, and you will soon pass away, and I wish to know if Joseph Smith, in your intimacy with him for 14 years, has not said something to you that led you to believe that he obtained the book in some other way than without which he has told you. Give me all you know about it, that I may know the truth. Father looked at me a moment and raised his hand above his head and slowly said, with tears glistening in his eyes, My son, I can swear before high heaven that what I've told you about the origin of the book is true. Your mother and sister, Mrs. Obega Robinson, were present when that book was handed to me in Mentor, Ohio, and all I ever know about the origin of that book was that Parley P. Pratt, Oliver Cowdery, Joseph Smith, and the witnesses who claim they saw the plates have told me. So in summary of the witnesses of the Book of Mormon, Richard Bushman has to say this: most of the detailed sources about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon were written by believers, and to follow them too closely infuses the narrative with their faith. Secular historians are therefore more inclined than Mormons to suppress source material from Joseph's closest associates. Okay, so in summary, what have we covered in this video? So the witnesses of the Book of Mormon translation claim that it was done using either the spectacles or the Urim and Thummim. Emma and Martin point towards that the Urim and Thummim was mostly used during the 116 pages, and the Book of Mormon as we have it was predominantly dictated through using the Seer stone, placing it in his hat, and dictating as the words appeared. That there is no note, manuscript, or book used in the translation of the Book of Mormon, and that there are many eyewitnesses. The witnesses testify that he dictated by inspiration and the power of God, and that it was beyond Joseph's natural capabilities. The three witnesses all testified as seeing the angel and the plates, and never deny their testimony, even after leaving the church and becoming disillusioned with Joseph Smith. The 8 witnesses testified to seeing and handling the plates, and that most critical sources against the witnesses are a small percentage of the data, which are normally second or third hand statements, which misrepresent, in my view, their testimonies and are not completely reliable, or should at least be interpreted in light of all of their other statements. In transparency, it's important to look at all of their first, second-hand statements and to look at the critical ones, but then to interpret them through the lens of all of their other statements, not just focusing on the few critical ones, ignoring all their faithful positive statements. And that both the statistical chance of mass hallucination seeming unlikely statistically, as well as a lack of evidence for Joseph engaging in metallurgical fraud to dupe the 8 witnesses. The term spiritual eyes and vision is scriptural and doesn't mean that they necessarily did not see the angel in the plates. Overall, the witnesses of the Book of Mormon support the book's divine origin, the angel, the reality of the plates, and the translation being by the gift and power of God. And I would also recommend to you yourself just read through the statements of the witnesses, read them all. I highly recommend the work of Richard Lloyd Anderson and his book on the witnesses. Overall, I don't think the witnesses, their testimony proves the Book of Mormon is true, that the translation is divine, or that the gold plates are ancient and real. However, I think their testimonies do need to be taken seriously into account as evidence in support and not just brush them aside. And I think particularly looking at their testimonies, where on numerous occasions, particularly the 3 witnesses, reaffirming their testimonies even after leaving the church. In my view, I often feel that the critics give a lot more weight to the few second or third hand statements, which might be a bit faith demoting, but they tend to ignore the vast majority of the very faithful statements of the witnesses, whether first hand or second hand, reaffirming that they really did see the angel, see the plates, and heard the voice of God, as well as the 8 witnesses who testified to seeing and handling the plates. I think their testimonies are powerful and sincere. I don't believe they're part of a conspiracy. I think they would have exposed the fraud had they been part of it. They were all sincere believers, so I don't see any sign of conspiracy. They could have exposed the fraud. Like Martin Harris said, he could have been a rich man. Personally, I find the metallurgical fraud theory and mass hallucination theory almost as sort of unlikely or improbable as what if their testimonies are true and the angel really did come with ancient gold plates. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's quite a thing for Joseph to have pulled off, and prophesying of it as well. They all have an audio and visual hallucination of the angel and the plates, which they never deny, which they are absolutely sure it was real to them. Is quite a thing to pull off. But ultimately, I think when it comes down to the witnesses and to the Book of Mormon, it is a matter of faith, whether or not you believe their testimonies or not. But I think it's important to look at the majority of their statements and not just a small few, which call into question if they really did see the plates. Overall, I think the testimony of the witnesses, both for the coming forth of the Book of Mormon and also for the gold plates, I think they are strong. I think these witnesses can't be dismissed. Their testimonies need to be taken seriously, and we shouldn't ignore their faithful statements. So that sums up today's video. I'll put links in the description where you can check out the sources and dive deeper. In the next video, we're going to be looking at the complexity of the Book of Mormon, and could Joseph Smith have orally dictated the Book of Mormon himself? Could he have done it naturalistically? So we're going to be looking at the time frame and the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, briefly touching on that, which we sort of covered in this video. We're going to be looking at the complexity of the Book of Mormon, the geography, plot lines, currency systems, genealogy, all the things that Joseph Smith had to keep straight in his head. Are there any ancient elements in the Book of Mormon, like Hebraisms or chiasmus? And we'll be looking at Joseph Smith's intellect, his level of education, and overall if Joseph Smith could have naturally done it. So if you enjoyed this episode, please give it a thumbs up, like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you all next time. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks everyone for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with others who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can also listen to these episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out my website for more content, personal blog, and more. And if you care to donate to support me, you can via my PayPal or Patreon, or through the website. And you can also give donations via YouTube through Super Chats. Thanks for watching Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.